At 1:23 a.m., a reactor exploded in the middle of nowhere. But 12 hours before that, everyone thought it was just another night. The city of Pripyat was quiet, cold, 30,000 people sleeping, children in their beds, shift workers heading to the plant for what was supposed to be a routine safety test. Simple paperwork. Home by morning. Nobody knew the reactor they were about to test was already losing control. Nobody knew that by sunrise, a cloud of radiation would be moving silently across Europe, that governments would lie about it for days, that the men sent to stop it would not be told what they were walking into, that some of them would be dead within 2 weeks. And nobody knew that this one failed test, in one reactor, would help collapse the most powerful political empire of the modern world. This is Chernobyl, and it starts long before the explosion. To understand Chernobyl, you have to understand what the Soviet Union needed it to be. By 1986, the USSR was a system running on image. The economy was struggling. The military was draining everything. But the nuclear program, that was still pride. Soviet reactors were proof that the system worked. Powerful, homegrown, world-class technology that didn't need Western approval. The Chernobyl plant sat 130 kilometers north of Kiev. For reactors, a workforce of thousands. And next to it, the city of Pripyat, built specifically for the plant's workers. 49,000 people. A supermarket stocked better than most Soviet cities. A swimming pool. A fairground. Working at Chernobyl wasn't just a job. It was a privilege. On the night of April 25th, the team running Reactor 4 was scheduled to run a safety test. It had been postponed multiple times. There was pressure from above to finish it before the reactor went into maintenance. The procedure had already passed through 2 shifts. The night team, exhausted, underbriefed, inherited it. That's where everything starts to break. The test was simple in theory. If the plant lost external power, could the spinning turbines keep the cooling pumps running until backup generators kicked in? A safety question. Routine. But the reactor was unstable. They knew it. They ran the test anyway. Here's why that mattered. The reactor had been sitting at low power for hours. And at low power, a gas called xenon 135 builds up inside the core, a gas that absorbs neutrons and fights the chain reaction. The longer you wait, the more xenon accumulates. The more xenon, the harder the reactor is to control. By the time the night shift started the test, the reactor was saturated. It was being forced to do something it was never designed to do under those conditions. And here's what made it worse. The man in charge that night was Anatoly Dyatlov, deputy chief engineer. Technically brilliant, completely intolerant of anyone who questioned him. When operators told him the power levels were dangerously low, that the test shouldn't proceed, Dyatlov told them to continue. They continued. But here's what no one in that room knew. The RBMK reactor had a design flaw. A classified flaw. When you inserted the control rods to shut the reactor down, the graphite tips at the end of each rod caused a brief spike in power before they started absorbing neutrons. Under normal conditions, manageable. Under the conditions in Reactor 4 that night, catastrophic. At 1:23 a.m., the operators initiated the emergency shutdown. The rods began to drop. What happened next should have been impossible. Instead of shutting down, the power spiked. In 3 seconds, the reactor hit 10 times its maximum output. The water in the cooling channels flashed to steam. The pressure blew the 1,000-ton steel lid off the top of the reactor like it weighed nothing. 2 explosions. The building tore open, and the core, the burning, radioactive core, was now open to the sky. And this is where it gets dangerous in a way most people don't fully understand. The first responders were firefighters. They arrived within minutes. They were told it was a roof fire at an electrical station. That's it. A roof fire. They climbed up with shovels and standard gear. No radiation protection, because nobody told them they needed it. They stepped on chunks of graphite scattered across the roof. One firefighter later described the graphite as warm under his boots. Pleasantly warm. Like heated pavement on a summer day. He was standing on pieces of an open nuclear reactor. Within hours, the men who had been on that roof were vomiting. Their skin was turning red. They had a metallic taste in their mouths that wouldn't go away. Some of them were losing hair by the next morning. Back inside the control room, Dyatlov was telling his team the reactor was intact, that what they were seeing was impossible, that the graphite on the ground must have come from somewhere else, a storage area, a roof panel, because the reactor itself could not have exploded. He said this while men around him were dying. And in Moscow, the information was being softened at every level. Each person who passed the news upward removed a layer of urgency, because in the Soviet system, delivering catastrophic news ended careers. By the time a report reached the Kremlin, it described a serious but contained incident. Under control. It was not under control. The core was burning. The smoke rising from it was carrying radioactive particles into the atmosphere. The wind was pushing it northwest, toward Belarus, toward Scandinavia, toward the rest of Europe. And in Pripyat, 3 kilometers away, 49,000 people woke up on Saturday morning and went about their weekend. Children went to school. People went to the market. A wedding took place that afternoon in the city park. Guests arrived in their good clothes. They danced. They toasted the couple. 3 kilometers from an open, burning nuclear reactor. The evacuation order didn't come for 36 hours. Here's what the Soviet government understood almost immediately and chose to hide. Chernobyl had released more radiation into the atmosphere than both atomic bombs dropped on Japan in 1945. Combined, many times over. Sweden found out first. 2 days after the explosion, workers at a Swedish nuclear plant were setting off radiation alarms, not from anything inside the facility, but from their own clothes and skin. The contamination was coming from Soviet airspace. Sweden went public and demanded answers. Only then did the USSR acknowledge that an accident had occurred. Their statement described it as minor. Contained. Under control. At the time of that statement, the reactor was still on fire. The men brought in to fight it were called liquidators. Over 600,000 of them eventually. Soldiers, miners, engineers, helicopter pilots. Pulled from across the Soviet Union and sent into the exclusion zone. Many were not told the truth about radiation levels. Many were given dosimeters set to a maximum reading far below what they were actually absorbing, so their official records would stay within legal limits. The paperwork said they were safe. Their bodies knew otherwise. Vasil Ignatenko was one of the first firefighters on that roof. 25 years old. Married less than 2 years. His wife Ludmila was pregnant. He spent hours in the worst contamination zone without protection because no one gave it to him, because no one told him what was there. He died 14 days later. Ludmila sat with him until the end, ignoring medical warnings about her own exposure. Their baby was born weeks later with multiple organ defects and lived only hours. She survived. She told her story to a journalist named Svetlana Alexievich, whose book about Chernobyl survivors won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2015. Dyatlov was convicted of criminal negligence. He served time. He spent the rest of his life blaming his operators. He never accepted responsibility. He died in 1995 still insisting the reactor, not the people running it, was at fault. He was right about that part. But he was the one who ordered the test to continue. 3 impacts. All still felt today. The human cost first. Nearly 350,000 people were permanently displaced from the exclusion zone. The long-term health effects, cancer rates, thyroid disease, birth defects in affected regions, are still being studied and still debated. The people who were closest to it, who fought it with their bodies, many of them are gone. The ones who survived carry it differently. In their health, in their silence, in the way they described that Saturday morning when everything still looked normal. The scientific cost second. The exclusion zone still exists. 30 kilometers around the plant where no one lives permanently. Inside it, Pripyat stands frozen in 1986. Furniture in the apartments, toys in the kindergartens, the fairground that never opened for a single visitor. Inside the reactor, the melted core formed a mass scientists call the elephant's foot, solidified uranium, graphite, and concrete that still emits enough radiation to be lethal within minutes of direct exposure. It will stay that way for roughly 20,000 years. The historical cost third, and this one changes everything. Mikhail Gorbachev said years later that Chernobyl was the real reason the Soviet Union collapsed. Not the economy, not the arms race. Chernobyl. Because Chernobyl proved in public, in a way that couldn't be erased or reclassified, that the gap between what the Soviet system claimed to be and what it actually was had become impossible to survive. 5 years after the explosion, the USSR ceased to exist. One reactor, one night, one decision to run a test that everyone in the room knew was dangerous. Some disasters leave a mark that doesn't have a half-life. What moment in history do you think the world never truly recovered from? Tell me in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.